Welcome back to the MD-80 Masterclass. I am your host, Mustafa. You can find me over on Twitch, where I stream regularly, and then come over here to YouTube and occasionally upload some videos, and I especially like doing these tutorial videos. And today we're doing this big tutorial series of videos on the MD-80 for Microsoft Flight Simulator, the Leonardo MD-80. And today is module number 2, Cockpit Familiarization. So we're not going to go into every switch, every button, where everything is, but we're going to give you an overview, a layout, so you can understand, because every aircraft does it a little bit different. The Boeings all kind of cluster their stuff in very similar ways. Airbus clusters their stuff in similar ways, and McDonnell Douglas had their own way too. And a lot of people often describe McDonnell Douglas as kind of being a hodgepodge between Boeing and Airbus. But they were their own thing, and that's why it kind of, I mean, there's only so many places you can put stuff. So you kind of end up with that. Some things are the same, some things are a little different, but we're going to go ahead and talk through those. So please hit the like button and subscribe if you wouldn't mind, helps the channel. And with that, we'll get down into it. If you have any questions during this process, by the way, please feel free to use the comment section down below. But the best way would be to go down to the description, hit the link for the Discord, join the Discord server. We got a great community of people over there, and you can post questions in there. I'm constantly watching Discord and checking Discord. There's other great guys in there too that are more than happy to help if they know the answer. And if we can't give you the answer off the top of our head, we will do our best to find the answer for you. So, also you can come to the live streams and just ask me point blank right there and put me on the spot. That always works too. Okay. So coming into the aircraft, when we first walk in, we're going to start with the overhead panel because it seems like a good place to start, and it's kind of right there in our face. So the overhead panel, like in most aircraft, is where we have all the systems that, for the most part, used to be relegated to the flight engineer if it wasn't something that was given over to the FMC. So you're going to find pressurization, you're going to find electrical, you're going to find fuel, you're going to find pneumatics, you're going to find lights. Most of that is all going to be up here. Now, some of the lights are actually on the glare shield, and we'll talk about those in a second. But just to give you a kind of an overview of where everything is, I kind of divide the panel into 3 sections. So you have the aft overhead, which is this guy here. And this is probably the part of the panel you'll have some of the least interaction with during the flight. Really, the only time you're looking up here is during the pre-flight and then maybe if there's a failure. But and some of this you don't even need to worry about. So this right here is the comms for the jump seat, which isn't going to be something that's really like modeled. Like you're not going to sit back here and need to manipulate anything with that. So it's there. You can click the stuff and things move, but you know, who cares? Why? Ground service, electrical power is right here. And again, this is something that was only ever used really by the maintenance guys. So you don't really need to touch this either. It's not going to do anything for you. So just, it's there, it's simulated, but you don't need to worry about it. Over on the other side is the fire loops for the APU and the 2 engines. Again, I'm not going to go into detail on these systems, just going to tell you kind of where they are so we kind of know. So your fire systems for the fire loops and cargo suppression is all up here on this upper aft panel. The most useful thing is this right here, and that is the overhead console lights, your panel floods, your panel backlighting, and your panel floods. So that's for the overhead. And then you also have your oxygen bottles, which you need to check during your pre-flight as well. This is the flight recorder, and this is a ground test and norm switch, and we will use that if you want to go super in-depth on your startup procedures, but otherwise you can just leave it guarded, and who cares. And the mech call, which would call the mechanics down below with a little buzzer. Again, it's not going to actually call anybody because they're just a bunch of pixels out there, so not really useful to us. So the overhead, the aft overhead, not really that big of a deal, but it's good to know where stuff is. The second panel is the circuit breakers, and these are the only circuit breakers in the aircraft that are modeled. So these ones you can actually pull, right click to pull them, left click to push them, and when they're pulled, you can see there's a little bit of white right there. Let me turn my view. Right there, and when you push them, it goes away. So when you're looking at the circuit breakers, you're just looking for that white ring, and if you don't see it, then you know they're all in. So you do want to check these circuit breakers as part of your pre-flight. Make sure nothing's popped, and if you do have a failure in the flight, this is always a good place to look as well and see if you do have a pop circuit breaker. The meat and potatoes of the overhead is what I'm going to call the forward overhead panel, or the primary overhead panel, and that is this guy, and that is all the way up to and including this little fun thing here, which we'll explain in a second. But even though this looks like a bit of a hodgepodge, it's really not that bad, and it's broken up into some very intelligent ways. So you can really kind of think of this in a couple different sections. So you have this kind of top section over here, which you can kind of think of all the way to the top, or at the very least from this point all the way over. And this is, if you're used to the 737, you have a number of switches over on the left-hand side of the overhead that kind of switch between the different screens. If a FO's screen was to go out, or if a flight director was to go out on one side, you can switch over. So that's what these are. The CADC is the main data computer. And so if one of them goes out, you can put both on the number 2 computer or both on the number 1 computer. Normally they're separated. So the air data computer on the captain's side runs his instruments, and the FO's side runs his, and that gives you some level of scrutiny as to whether or not the signals you're getting are correct or not, considering they should match. And they're 2 different computers. But if you lose one, then you don't want to just have one set of instruments working, so then you can do that. Same thing with the flight director computer. The AHRS, which is the IRS equivalent in the McDonnell Douglas, it doesn't actually use an inertial reference system. It uses a GPS system, and that's what this is here. But again, there's 2 of them for redundancy, and so you can switch those over around if you need to. And then your EFIS over here, your FMS, and your radio nav. Again, there's 2 sets of each, and if we lose one, you need to be able to tell the aircraft, hey, just focus on this one. We don't want to use the bad data. So those are always up in the noon position, and they're up at the top. You got the cockpit voice recorder right there. This whole section, if you think about this big section right here, all the way down to here, this big square, is all electrical. So you have your generators for your engines, your APU generator, you have the gauges for those things. You have your main switches to cut over the APU generators, the external power, AC and DC bus ties. And then over here is your APU controls, which you can think of this as part of the electrical too, with the exception of the air switch, I guess. But everything else is basically electrical. It's electrical to start it, it gives electrical power. And then you have the fire controls, obviously, for the APU itself there as well. And the emergency power switch, big knob right there. So this whole panel is your electrical stuff. Below that is the fuel panel. And so you have your fuel pumps, your center pumps, and your left and right pumps. And you have aft and forward pumps of each one. Again, redundancy. You have your engine starter switches are right here. And your fuel heats start pump, which is not for starting the engines. This is for starting the APU on a DC power source only. If you have external power connected and you're using it, you don't use the start pump, not even for starting your engines. I can always tell a seasoned MD-80 sim pilot by if they use the switch or not when they're not supposed to. Engine ignition system is right here. And then below that, so that's fuel. So you have electrical, fuel. Below that is ice protection and also seatbelts and no smoking and emergency lights. So a little bit of lights, mostly ice protection, pitot heats, windshield anti-fog and anti-ice, engine anti-ice and airfoil anti-ice, tail anti-ice, and pitot heats are all right here. And then seatbelts, no smoking, and emergency lights. All right, other side of the panel. There's a natural divide right down the middle here, the Great Divide. And so coming over to the other side here, we have at the very top the engine sync selector, which you don't really even need to use, but you only need to use it. You only can use it in cruise anyway. We'll talk about it later. Down here is the ground proximity warnings and wind shear warning tests for those systems. You have circuit breaker lights and thunderstorm lights and the cockpit floodlights all right here. This is just an ACARS message alert. This is the flight recorder input, so you would change this to the day, the month, the flight number, the leg, and insert that. Again, it's not going to do anything in the sim, but it's fun to just model that and go through the process for those of us that like the immersion. Below that is just a whole bunch of tests for the most part, and the attendant call. So you have the attendant call and the PA light there, but after that, it's all tests. So anti-skid test, stall test, max speed test, Mach test, yaw dampers, ice FOD test, and a logo light. So the light panel kind of drifts down here. You can see that, like, I would have put that light like up here, like keep it out of the test area. There's some things that are just a little kind of hodgepodgey on the MD-80. It gives it some character, but there's some, like, just some weird things. Like, you get the seatbelt signs and stuff. Maybe you put them up here by the A-cars thing instead of keeping them down here with the ice protect. I don't know. It just seems like some odd options, but, you know, whatever. Below all the tests, you have the air conditioning and pressurization panel. That's this big square here. Top is air conditioning. Bottom is pressurization. So you have your pack controls right here. You have your pressurization control right here. Your big readout for your pressurization is right there. And then below that, this is the cabin climb. So this is actually part of the pressurization. It kind of dips into here. But then you have your windshield wipers right here and your flight deck door locking right there. This down here is all annunciators, and this is known as the EOAP, the electronic, or is it EA? Electronic Annunciator. No, it's EOAP. But I'm not remembering what the O stands for. But it's an electronic annunciator panel, basically what it is. And you have little categories of things you can push down here. Again, we're not going to go into how this works right now because that's not what this video is for. But that's where it is. This is, when you see EOAP referenced in your checklist, they're referring to this. This should be clear. This is a more traditional annunciator panel right here, just physical things with lights on them. This is digital and will change messages based on what's going on. It's kind of cool. It was very fancy for its time. Okay, moving down. So that is the overhead panel. That kind of should demystify this. This looks like a crazy hodgepodge, but hopefully it demystifies it a little bit. We'll move down to the glare shield, and the glare shield is where we have kind of the more important lights for the exterior of the aircraft. So these were all like internal lights. The external lights are all over here. So the captain side has the wing landing lights and the nose lights, which have a extend and then extend on. So you can extend them and then just have them off, or you can have them extended on. Nose lights have an off, dim, and a bright setting for taxi. And on the other side, you have the position lights, which you have off, position, and both. This is position and strobe. So in the off position, they're all off. Position is the nav lights. Position and strobe is the bottom. The strobe lights come on automatically when the aircraft lifts off the squat switches on the rotation. So when the main gears come up, the strobes go on automatically. So there's no sense in ever setting this to anything but both, because the strobes won't come on until you're lifting off the runway anyway. Which is kind of annoying because you kind of want to be able to turn the strobes on when you're getting on the runway, but you can't. Anti-collision is your beacon. That's the rotating beacon top and bottom. That's right there. You have the floodlights for the ground. So you have some ground floodlights to help on either side of the aircraft for ground crew. And you have a wing nacelle light that sits both sides or right side only. And again, that can help with loading, but it also helps you see ice on the wing, and that's why that's there. The rest of the center console is the autopilot. And on the captain side and the FO side are the VOR or the navigation radio, the radio frequency and the course. You have the flight director switches for each side. You have your auto throttle and autopilot master switches. This little guy down here switches between autopilot 1 and autopilot 2. So if the FO is pilot flying, you'd have that in number 2. When the captain's flying, you have that in number 1. And then your various selectors for speed, Mach Select, VOR, Nav, ILS, Auto Land, Vert Speed, VNav, Alt Hold, etc. FMS Override, by the way, if you're using the Canadian Marconi PMS system instead of the Honeywell, this button will still be here, but is a dummy switch at that point. So just be aware of that. That won't do anything. We'll explain that when we talk about the FMSs. All right, coming over onto the back end, we have the lion's share of the circuit breakers, but these are not modeled. I mean, they're modeled in the sense that they're here, but they're not. You can't interact with them. They won't pop. They can't be pushed in. They're just there. So don't worry about really having to check those, but that's what they are. You have a suitcase over here for your old school paper charts, which again doesn't do anything, but it's there. Down here is your oxygen panel for the captain side. FO has one just like it on his side. And the captain's radio panel, which is similar to the jump seat panel we saw up top. This one actually will do stuff with your radio and vPilot if you're online and stuff, so you want to be aware of that. Tiller right here, and the parking brake is right inside that. Up is on, so you push to, as you pull up to engage the parking brake, you push down to release, and then obviously you steer the nose wheel with that tiller right there. The options here are all for your ND. This is ND controls down here for changing the different map modes, changing the ADF selector stuff, and changing your range. Also adding different pieces of data like airports, data, waypoint, nav aids, stuff like that. And a briefcase light that is not modeled. If the tablet offends you and you don't like it in your face, because you don't need it during all phases of flight. In fact, you really only need it during takeoff, landing, and on the ground. So in cruise, you can put it away. And if you right-click on this little nubbin right here, that sends it away. And right-clicking brings it back. So it will not turn off when you do that. If you want to turn the tablet off, it will run out of power, by the way. You just hold the button right there, and that will turn off. Boom. Now, with the tablet there or not, you can operate the window, which is pretty cool, and it's a pretty elaborate mechanism, too. And you just click that little ball, which is basically right off the throttle of a DC-3, and it pushes that guy right back. Also, the window shade is usable, too. You click it to put it in down position, and then use your mouse wheel while holding your mouse over the top of it to scroll it back and forth. And it does work. Protects your eyes from the sun when the sun's out. Obviously, it does weird things with ground artifacts sometimes, but in the air, it actually is quite effective. It's pretty cool. And there's one on the FO side, too, that comes all the way around to almost center. This one goes almost center, and they can't go all the way around. The real aircraft, they can go all the way around, but they can go to the center each for them. All right. This aircraft does have a yoke. And you can get rid of the yoke by clicking at the base of it if it's in your way and annoying, and sometimes that is the case, especially when you're sitting in the captain's seat and you push forward and it covers up the ND. So you can either raise your position a little bit or you can just get rid of the yoke. I like to fly with it because it feels more realistic, but that's up to you. There is on the yoke, by the way, a autopilot disconnect switch. You can wire stuff like this through using stuff like SPAD or X's and O's to on your physical yokes, which is what I've done, and we can talk about those later. But otherwise, you can click that to disconnect the autopilot, or you can reach up here and hit the autopilot switch right there. On the front panel, in fact, I'm going to get rid of the yoke while we're talking about the front panel. Is your lights for the captain's panel lights are right here, panel, digital, and flood. You have static, air, alt, and norm. This, again, normally stays norm. You even have floodlights for your feet if you want them. Again, I don't have power on the aircraft, so it's not going to do anything right now, but they're there. You have your chronometer, which is your clock right here. You've got your airspeed, which is an analog airspeed. You have your altimeter, an analog altimeter. And then you have your RMA, which is the radio magnetic indicator, or radio magnetic. I forget what the A stands for. It's the radio magnetic something. It'll come to me later. I'm talking too much. You also have terrain buttons for doing terrain on the ND. The ND and PFDs, this will be your artificial horizon. This will be like an HSI, but digital, and have the map mode, magenta line on it and all that. And controls for the brightness and things of those are right over here. This guy is a vertical speed indicator, and TCAS is all right here. And then right here is the FMA. This is the flight mode annunciator, and this will tell you speed indications, autopilot indications, heading indications or nav indications, and altitude indications. So this is very important. This is how you check and see what mode your autopilot is set in, and you always want to make sure you're aware of that. Brake pressure indicator right there. Standby instruments. So this is, you've got your artificial horizon, and then you also have your altimeter and a speed tape right there. So all your main instruments are all right there in case of emergency. Easy access. Engine instruments you have right here. You've got the EPR, engine pressure ratio, N1, exhaust gas temperature, and N2. Fuel flow is down here, and you can switch that between flow and used by clicking that little button right down there. Over here we have the engine indications for oil temperature, oil pressure, hydraulic pressure, flaps, and things like that. And all of that is right there. Right below that is the fuel. So you have left main, right main, and center, total fuel, and gross weight. And again, we'll talk about how this all works and calculates and tabulates. Very helpful right there. Your landing gear and your gear indicator lights. And then this is the TRP auto and off, or ART actually, the automatic reserve thrust. And anytime you flex, basically that needs to be off. And we'll explain that when we talk about that system there. The other side is identical to the captain's side with a couple exceptions. We have the hydraulic pumps are over here on the FO side for some reason. This is another funny placement. So you have high, low, and off, and then you have the aux pump and the trans pump, which is the equivalent on an Airbus of like a PTO to transfer power between the two hydraulic systems. Brake temperature indicator right down here. Everything else over here is the same. The printer for the ACARS over here, which it was modeled in the P3D one. It is not yet modeled to be functional in the Microsoft Flight Sim one. I'm hoping at some point it is, because that was a cool, fun little feature of the Maddog in the P3D. You have your oxygen bottle sitting over here. Again, there's nothing really to do with it. You do have over here a functional passenger oxy mask, which you have to use the wheel scroll to open that thing up and then eject the masks out of their holding. I don't think it actually does that in the cockpit, but it's kind of cool to play with that. Let's see here. Anything over... This no, this isn't modeled, so there's nothing really to do there. The door does close, but it doesn't close that way. You've got to close it with the... you have to hit the deny on the flight deck door there, and that closes the door. So just for familiarization purposes. We'll now come down to the pedestal. And so in the middle we have the weather radar, which is modeled. It is modeled. It does work. Looking at you, PMDG. Again, it's got the limitations that Asobo has given them, but it's, you know, it's better than nothing. So we do have working weather radar in the Maddog. You've got your two FMS computers right here, left and right. And then over in the center here is our throttle quadrant. We have the stabilizer trim handles, the suitcase handles they're called. That's the trim indicator. This green arrow right here responds to this what's the word I'm looking for? Analog flap CG computer. So you put in whatever your calculated CG is right here, and what your takeoff flap is going to be right here, and it's going to set this green indicator, and you need to set your trim to be in line with that green indicator. So the middle of that should be in line with that. Now, if you set flaps 11 here, the aircraft now thinks flaps 11 is what's required for takeoff. So if you don't set flaps 11 on your flap handle, when you go to take off and push your throttles forward, you're going to get a flap or slats or parking or brake or what's the other one? Brake... stabilizer. There's a few of them that are all a computer-generated takeoff warnings. So if you get that, you may have set it here. This doesn't set your flap. This tells your aircraft what your flap should be, and this is where you set your flap here. And you make sure on the flap indicator that it's actually aligned with 11 at that point. That's how you know. So that's what that is. You have your alternate trim right here. This is electronic trim. It's much slower, but if something was to break, you can do it here. Fuel switches for the engines, for starting the engines. Gear horn cutoff. So if it's you get that noisy gear horn, you got to override it. Click that guy. It'll silence that. This is your pressure valve. This is actually really cool. In automatic, which is what it's in now, it'll run automatically. But if you close that, you can use your scroll wheel to move this and automatically move and manually move the outflow valve for the pressurization. If you lose your pressurization controller, this is how you have to pressurize and depressurize the airplane. And it is a pain. Let me tell you, I've done a flight with this. It's a pain to do this manually, but it can be done. And it's super cool that it's simulated to do that. But always make sure this is in the up position so it's in automatic. And when the aircraft is powered by pushing the throttles up, this will automatically close the outflow valve. And so it's a good way to test to make sure it's in automatic. So you can test the takeoff configuration horn and that all at the same time. You got your flap handle right here, and dial-a-flap. Dial-a-flap is only used for takeoff. It should always be in the stowed position for landing. There is an exception. I'm told Delta was told they could set up to, I think it was 23? Yeah, I think it was 23 or 23 and a half was the maximum you could set so you could get the maximum amount of flaps before you were in a landing configuration. And what that would do is you could put the flaps down lower than 15 without the gear horn going off. Because once you go into 28, the plane thinks you're in landing configuration, and if the gear's not down, it's going, hey, it starts wailing at you. So I read that Delta, I think it was, would often roll that there, but I leave it in the stow position unless I'm using dial-a-five for takeoff, and once I'm in the air, you put it back to stow. Down here, the pedestal, this will be blank unless, of course, you're running the Canadian Marconi PMS, and we'll talk about that when we talk about FMCs. That's kind of cool. Your transponder is back here. Nav radios, Nav 1 and Nav 2 offset, which is kind of awkward, and Nav 3, or COM 1 and COM 2, Nav 1 and Nav 2 are up here. COM 1 and COM 2, and then COM 3, which is for the ACARs, and so that'll be on data. Don't touch that one. You have your ADF radios down here if you ever need to use those. Very rare, but hey, you never know. You might need to do an NDB approach, so there you go. And then panel lights for the center, panel, digital, and floods. Cell call, again, not really simulated to do anything because VATSIM doesn't really do anything with cell call outside of vPilot, so there's no point. Finally, in the very back, you have your trims. So you have your rudder trim up on top, aileron trim over here, stabilizer trim cutout. In the 737, this would be the MCAS override switch, basically, but this will allow you to cut out your stabilizer trim, and the only trim that will work when you do that is the alternate trim. So that's the only way to trim the aircraft. You turn that off. It should be a norm all the time. And then these guys, this always throws everybody off, is a pneumatic crossfeed valves. And what this does, this opens up the mix manifold for the pneumatic air coming off either the engines or the APU, and allows it to go to different places around the aircraft. So if you've got APU air and you need to start your engines and these are closed, well, the APU can't get any air to the engine area because these are closed. So for engine start, these always need to be open, but generally speaking, once the engines are running, you keep these closed so that the right engine is only powering, sending air to the right pack and vice versa. So that way, if there is an issue or a funny smell or smoke or something in the engine and it gets into the cabin, you can isolate that and keep it to one side and not have issues. So always best to keep those closed unless you're on the ground. So on the ground, one of the first things I always do is open those so I don't forget. Because if you want to use send APU air to the air conditioning packs, those also have to be open because the APU is on this side of the packs, which are over by the engines. So, or not physically necessarily by the engines, but in the grand scheme of the pneumatic system, they're in line with the engines, if you want to think of it that way. Okay. Anything else in here? Yes, you can do the what do you call it? I'm blanking on the name. The person that flies in the back. I can't believe I can't. I don't know. I don't even know. It's just not. It's just my mind is completely blank right now. The jump seat. That's what it's called. So you can open up that too. That is modeled. The various lights up here, I believe, are modeled as well. I think the map light. Oh, maybe not. I thought the map lights were. Nope, maybe not. But there's plenty of light in the cockpit that lights stuff up. It's very well done. The one goofy, so the biggest character goof, and I'll give you this overview of the MD-80 is the standby compass. You'll notice there is no standby compass in the MD-80. Now there is, and in the real aircraft it's back here in this little window, which it's not modeled. And the reason why, I think it was just too complicated to figure out how to do it, because it's modeled in reverse, so you have to read it through a mirror. And the way you read it is with these little mirrors, which are modeled, but they don't actually reflect anything. They just, they reflect kind of outside, but not really anything else useful. But that's how you would read the standby magnetic compass. And the reason is because that was the best place to put it where it wouldn't get a bunch of interference from other things and throw off its readings. So it feels kind of like a afterthought, and maybe it kind of was. I don't know. But that's what that is. All right, and then obviously you have your tablets. We talked about you turn those on and off with that little nubbin down there. That is the flight deck overview, and we're just right inside of 30 minutes, which is where I want to keep the video to. So that gives you a nice overview of the aircraft, where things are. The next The next thing will be aircraft systems. So we'll actually go in and start talking about the different systems themselves. And these ones will be a bit longer, and they may even be their own little videos for the electrical system, the fuel system, the air system, and stuff like that. So you guys have an understanding of really how the MD-80 systems work, because that'll help you get an overall picture for the aircraft. But this should give you a good layout. After we do aircraft systems, we will go into pre-flight procedures, and that's where we'll actually go through an entire flow of how we turn the aircraft on from cold and dark, and get the thing powered up and ready to go. We'll build a whole flight together. We'll actually show you how to do that for the FMCs, both for the Honeywell and the PMS, or the Marconi rather. And then later on, we'll do the taxi, takeoff, cruise, landing, and the whole 9 yards. So I know I just kind of breezed through this really fast. Again, I'm trying to keep these videos kind of short so they're helpful, but also got a lot of knowledge in them and gives you good basis to start for this aircraft. But the beauty of YouTube is you can stop, pause, slow down, rewind, watch again. It doesn't have to be where you get it in one sitting necessarily. So hopefully this is helpful to you. Again, please like and subscribe this video if you did find it helpful. I do stream on Twitch, twitch.tv/Mustafa. You can find me over there most every week, many different days of the week, and it's always a good time over there. Please also, if you have questions or comments, put them in the comments below, but the best place to ask questions is the Discord. Link in the description below. Join our Discord, and feel free to ask all the MD-80 questions or just other aviation-related questions. I love, not only for myself, but my community being able to help people in flight sim, whether you're new or you've been around the block and you still got questions about stuff. That's why I do this. I think it's a lot of fun to help people learn how to do flight sim. I always appreciated it when people help me, so it's my job to give back in that way. All right, until next time, from here in Las Vegas, the flight deck of the MD-82, thank you for watching the MD-80 Masterclass Cockpit Familiarization. We'll see you on the next one.